Somebody who loves you taught you the wrong rules about money. Read that sentence again. Not a stranger, not an enemy, somebody who loves you. Your parents told you to get good grades, get a safe job, and save what is left over. They meant it with their whole heart. Your teachers told you to study hard and follow the system because the system had worked for them. Your friends told you that money is not that important, that you should not chase it too hard. Your government built a system that rewards spending today and taxes building wealth tomorrow. The books on the shelf told you to budget your way to freedom. The podcasts in your ears told you to hustle harder, post more, and the money will come. None of these people lied to hurt you. They told you what they were told. They handed you a map that was drawn for a world that no longer exists, and you have been driving in circles on that old map, wondering why you never arrive. Here is the part that stings. All of that advice came from the people who love you most. Your mom and dad, your favorite teacher, your closest friend. That is exactly why you never questioned it. Love is a wonderful thing, but love is not the same thing as truth. Sometimes the people who love you the most pass down the rules that keep you the most stuck. Think about how you actually learned about money in the first place. Nobody sat you down and taught you on purpose. You absorbed it by watching. You watched how your parents talked about bills at the kitchen table. You watched what your teachers praised and what they ignored. You watched what your friends laughed at and what they admired. By the time you were old enough to question any of it, the rules were already inside you, quiet and invisible, running your decisions without asking your permission. There are two sets of rules about money. There is the set that gets taught in public, in classrooms, at dinner tables, in viral videos. And there is the set that a small group of people actually practice in private, quietly, without posting about it. You have only ever been shown the first set. Today, for the next stretch of time, you get to see the second one. Jim Rohn spent his whole life studying that second set of rules. He was not born wealthy. He was a farm kid in Idaho with no special advantage. But he became one of the most quoted voices in personal development because he noticed something almost nobody else said out loud. He said that you do not get rich by accident. You get rich by discipline, applied in private for years while nobody is watching. This video is built on 6 of his ideas, sharpened and updated for the world you live in right now. Not 7, not 10, 6. Here is why the number matters. Every wealth-building life, when you study it closely, rests on exactly 6 pillars. Add a 7th and you are just repeating one of the first 6 in a new outfit. Remove one of the 6 and the whole structure leans and eventually falls. 6 is not a marketing number. 6 is the actual number of load-bearing walls in the house of wealth. Take one out and watch what happens to the roof. You will be tempted, somewhere in the middle of this video, to think you already know one of these pillars and to skip ahead. Resist that urge. Knowing the name of a pillar and actually living inside it are two very different things. Most people have heard some version of every idea you are about to hear. Almost none of them have built their actual daily life around all 6 at the same time. That gap between hearing and living is the entire subject of this video. Before we go further, you need one warning. Some of what you hear in the next few minutes will contradict things you were taught at home, at school, or online. That is not because this video is trying to be controversial. It is because most of what gets taught about money is built to keep you comfortable, not to make you wealthy. If you are the kind of person who needs to be told you were right all along, you should close this video right now. If you can sit with being wrong about something you have believed your whole life, stay. The next part is for you. This pattern shows up in places you would never expect. It happens in the small back office of a family hardware store in a town outside Akron, Ohio. It happens behind the counter of a dry cleaner in a strip mall outside Tucson, Arizona. It happens in the break room of a school where the janitor works longer than most of the teachers. It happens in a tiny machine shop outside Greenville, South Carolina, where the owner still answers his own phone. Quiet rooms, ordinary buildings. People nobody writes articles about. That is where the real rules of money are actually being practiced, while the loud advice gets shared online by people who are often broke. You will not find these people on a stage. You will not find them selling a course about how they did it. They are too busy actually doing it. That is part of why the public rules and the private rules stay so separated. The people who live by the private rules are quiet about it on purpose, and the people who are loudest about money online are very often the ones still searching for the answer themselves. Keep that in mind for the rest of this video. Volume and wealth are almost never the same thing. The first pillar is called the spread. When I was 24, I made decent money and had nothing to show for it. Every dollar that came in found a way to leave by the end of the month. I was not lazy and I was not foolish. I simply never looked at the real number that mattered. That number is not your income. It is the gap between what you earn and what you spend. Jim Rohn called this the difference between your income and your living. Most people raise their income their whole life and never once look at that gap. So the gap stays the same size no matter how much they earn. Notice that? A raise does not make you wealthy. A raise only makes you wealthy if the gap between earning and spending gets wider, not narrower. There was a janitor who worked the night shift at a regional hospital in a small city in the Midwest. He never made more than modest hourly wages in his entire working life. Coworkers assumed he was just getting by, the way most people assumed about him. When he passed away in his 80s, his family found that he had built an account worth well over $1 million. He never earned a large income. He simply never let his spending catch up to his income, year after year, decade after decade. The gap was small in dollars, but it was wide in percentage, and percentage is what compounds. Here is the math, because the math is the only honest teacher in this room. Picture two people earning the exact same income for 30 years. One person keeps a gap of 5% between what comes in and what goes out. The other person keeps a gap of 20%. Run that gap through ordinary, unspectacular growth over 3 decades, and the person with the wider gap ends up with several times more than the person with the narrow gap, even though they earned the identical income the entire time. The size of your paycheck is not the variable that changes your life. The size of your gap is. Let me tell you about a person you have probably already met without realizing it. There is almost always one person in every workplace who earns less than everyone around them, but somehow seems calmer about money than anyone else. People assume that person is just naturally relaxed. More often, that person simply solved the spread years ago, quietly, while everyone around them kept chasing a bigger number instead. A river does not carve a canyon in one flood. It carves a canyon by running the same small path every single day for thousands of years. Your spread is your river. Let it run small and steady, and one day you will look up and see a canyon where there used to be flat ground. Most people try to fix their money by chasing a bigger river instead of a wider gap. They ask for a raise, take a second job, or look for a new career, and they assume the gap will widen on its own once the income rises. It almost never does, because spending has a way of rising right alongside it unless you decide on purpose that it will not. The janitor from that hospital never once asked for a raise that changed his life. He simply refused to let his spending follow his income upward year after year, while almost everyone around him let theirs rise without question. That single refusal, repeated quietly for decades, did more for him than any promotion ever could have. The second pillar is called the soldier test. I used to believe that the people who built wealth had some special burst of motivation that I was missing. I waited for that burst for years. It never came. What I eventually understood is that the people who build something real are not the most excited people in the room. They are the most willing to keep showing up after the excitement is completely gone. Jim Rohn used to say that discipline is the bridge between goals and results, not motivation. Discipline. There was a man who immigrated to this country with very little money and very little English. He took a job stocking shelves at a small grocery store because it was the only job available to him. He worked that job without complaint for years while he learned the language, learned the business, and saved almost everything he could. By the time he turned 48, he owned 4 small stores of his own in that same city. Nobody gave him a head start. He simply outlasted everyone who quit when the work stopped feeling exciting. This is the soldier test, not the test of whether you can start something. The test of whether you can keep doing the boring, repeated, unglamorous version of it long after every ounce of motivation has left the building. Here is the math behind this one. If you save and invest a modest amount every single month on time without skipping for 30 straight years, the simple act of never missing a month does more for your final number than almost any other decision you will make. Missing even a handful of months early on can cost you years of growth later, because the growth you skip never gets the chance to compound. Consistency beats intensity almost every single time, because intensity burns out and consistency does not. Bamboo spends its first several years growing roots underground that you cannot see, with almost nothing showing above the soil. Then, almost overnight, it shoots up faster than nearly any other plant on Earth. People who quit during the root years never get to see the shooting up. The soldier test is simply staying alive through the years where nothing visible is happening. If you are still with me, here is the part that should land hard. The man who stocked those shelves did not have a secret advantage you do not have. He had years where his bank account barely moved, where nobody noticed, where it would have been completely understandable to quit and just spend what he had. He passed the soldier test specifically because nobody was checking on him. There was no audience watching to keep him honest. There was only the quiet decision, repeated every single week, to keep showing up the same way he had the week before. The third pillar is called the compounding decade. I wasted my first real decade of working life completely ignoring the idea of time. I thought I had plenty of it. I was wrong about how expensive that mistake would turn out to be. Time, not income, is the single most valuable asset most people throw away without noticing. There was a draftsman in a small engineering firm in a quiet city in the Pacific Northwest. He never earned a large salary in his entire career, but he began putting a small, steady amount of every paycheck into long-term investments starting in his early 20s, decades before most of his coworkers ever started. By the time he reached his 50s, he was able to retire, while coworkers who had earned more than him for years were still working because they had started a decade or more later. Here is the math, because the math is the only honest teacher in this room. If 2 people invest the same amount every month at the same average growth rate, but one of them starts 10 years earlier, the early starter can end up with roughly double the final amount of the late starter, even though the late starter invested money for almost as many total years. The first decade is worth more than every decade that follows it combined, because it has the most time left to grow. No investment outcome is ever guaranteed, but the relationship between time and growth is simple arithmetic, not luck. A seed planted in good soil does almost nothing visible for a long stretch of time. Then one day the growth above ground happens so fast it looks sudden to anyone who was not watching closely. It was never sudden. It was always the soil working quietly underneath, for longer than anyone wanted to wait. No market and no investment ever moves in a perfectly straight line, and nothing here is a promise about what any specific investment will do. What is not in question is the simple relationship between time and growth. The earlier you start, even with small amounts, the more years your money has to work on your behalf instead of you working for every single dollar by hand. That draftsman did not pick some secret investment nobody else knew about. He simply started 10 years before his coworkers, and let those extra 10 years do quiet work in the background while he kept showing up to his ordinary job. The fourth pillar is called the skill stack. For years, I believed that my income was tied to my job title. Jim Rohn taught something different. He said that to have more, you have to become more. Your income very rarely rises above the value of the skills you carry inside you. If you want to be paid more, the real lever is not asking for more. The real lever is becoming worth more. There was a barber who ran a small shop in a working-class neighborhood for over 30 years. Cutting hair alone never made him wealthy. What changed his life is that he slowly stacked other skills on top of that one. He learned basic bookkeeping so he could manage his own shop's money. He learned how to train and manage a small staff. He learned how to negotiate his own lease instead of accepting whatever the landlord offered. None of those skills alone was rare. Stacked together, they made him valuable in a way that almost nobody else in his neighborhood was. Here is the math behind a skill stack. One skill that puts you in the top half of people who have it is common and not worth much extra. But if you stack 3 separate skills, each only putting you in the top quarter of people who have them, the combination of all 3 together can put you in a tiny sliver of the population, often without you ever becoming the single best at any one of them. Rare combinations pay far more than common excellence. This is exactly what Jim Rohn meant when he said you have to be worth more if you want to earn more. He did not mean work more hours at the same skill level. He meant become a different, more valuable version of yourself, on purpose, one stacked skill at a time, until your employer or your customers could not easily replace you even if they wanted to. One tree standing alone in a field can be knocked down by a single strong storm. A forest of different trees with different roots and different heights survives storms that would destroy any one tree by itself. Your income is safest and largest when it is held up by a forest of skills, not a single tree. Jim Rohn called this kind of growth personal development, and he treated it as a daily discipline, not a one-time event. He did not mean reading one book and calling yourself finished. He meant choosing, every single week, to add one more small skill to the stack, the same way that barber kept adding skills long after he had already mastered the basic trade that paid his bills. The people who keep stacking skills long after they feel comfortable are almost always the ones whose income keeps rising for the rest of their working life. If you are still with me at this point, notice something. None of the 6 pillars so far have asked you to take a big risk or find a lucky break. Every one of them has asked for the same thing in a different shape, which is ordinary effort, repeated for longer than feels reasonable. The 5th pillar is called the lifestyle freeze. This is the pillar almost nobody wants to hear, because it asks you to do less, not more. Every time your income goes up, your spending quietly tries to rise right alongside it. New car, bigger apartment, nicer vacations. None of it feels reckless in the moment. It just feels like you finally deserve it. Jim Rohn warned about this exact trap. He said that the same discipline that helps you earn more is the discipline you must use to keep your living from rising at the same speed as your earning. I made this mistake myself the first time I got a meaningful raise. Within a year, my spending had risen to swallow almost the entire increase, and I felt no richer than before the raise happened. The raise was real. The freedom from it was not, because I let my lifestyle eat it before it had a chance to grow. There is a quiet move that wealthy households use that almost nobody talks about openly. When their income rises, they freeze their spending at the old level for a period of time, and they direct the entire increase toward building wealth before they allow their lifestyle to catch up at all. It feels uncomfortable for a short while. It is also one of the fastest ways to widen the spread you learned about earlier, without having to earn a single extra dollar. Here is the math. If you freeze your spending and direct just half of every future raise toward building wealth instead of lifestyle, while still allowing yourself to enjoy the other half, your gap widens every single year for the rest of your working life without ever feeling like deprivation. Small, repeated discipline beats one dramatic burst of saving that you cannot sustain. A dam does not destroy the river. It simply holds part of the water back long enough to build real pressure and real power. The water that flows through eventually does far more work than the water that was ever allowed to just run free downhill. Your lifestyle freeze is your dam. This is the pillar most people skip even after they understand it, because it does not feel like progress in the moment. Freezing your lifestyle while your income grows can feel like punishing yourself for doing well. It is the opposite. It is the one decision that turns a bigger paycheck into actual freedom, instead of just a slightly more comfortable version of the same trap you were already in. The sixth and final pillar is called the quiet network. Jim Rohn is famous for one line above almost all others. He said you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Most people hear that line and nod, then go right back to spending their time exactly the same way they always have. The people around you do not just affect your mood. Over years, they shape your habits, your standards, and your beliefs about what is even possible for you. There was a mechanic who ran a small auto shop on the edge of a mid-sized city. For most of his career, his closest circle was made up of other people just getting by, and his own habits matched theirs almost exactly. In his 40s, almost by accident, he started spending time with a small group of local business owners who met casually once a month to talk about their businesses. He did not change his trade. He changed his circle. Within a few years, his habits around saving, reinvesting in his shop, and planning ahia. D had shifted to match the new circle around him, and his own results shifted right along with it. Here is the math behind a network. If even one person in your closest circle of 5 has a habit you do not yet have, you are statistically far more likely to pick that habit up over time without even trying, simply through repeated exposure. The reverse is also true. If your closest circle has no one with the habit you are trying to build, you are fighting the pull of your entire environment every single day, alone. Changing 5 conversations a month can change a decade of your life. Jim Rohn did not say this to make anyone feel guilty about the people they love. He said it as a simple observation about how human beings actually work. You do not need to remove anyone from your life to apply this pillar. You simply need to add a few new conversations on purpose, with people slightly ahead of you in the area you are trying to grow, and let the average slowly shift on its own. Bees do not make honey alone in isolation. They make it together in a hive through constant contact with each other. Your circle is your hive. Choose carefully who else is buzzing around inside it. That mechanic did not need a business degree to change his results. He needed different conversations, repeated often enough to slowly become his new normal. If you are still with me at minute 18, ask yourself honestly who the 5 people are that you talk to the most right now, and whether their habits around money are habits you actually want to inherit. That is not an insult to any of them. It is simply the most overlooked lever on this entire list. Here is the great paradox sitting underneath everything you just heard. Every single one of these 6 pillars is simple enough to write on the back of a napkin. Widen your spread, pass the soldier test, respect the compounding decade, stack your skills, freeze your lifestyle, choose your quiet network. A child could understand every sentence in that list. And yet, when you look at how few people actually live by all 6 at once, the number is shockingly small. It is not complicated enough to confuse you. It is demanding enough to filter you. The pillars are not a secret. The follow-through is the secret. This is exactly the kind of philosophy Jim Rohn spent his entire life teaching, often to rooms full of people who already knew every word he was about to say. Knowing was never the missing piece. Doing, on the days it felt pointless, was always the missing piece. He used to remind people that what is easy to do is also easy not to do, and that single sentence explains almost every difference between the few who build wealth and the many who only talk about it. So here is what you do next, and I am asking you to actually do this, not just agree with it in your head. Get a piece of paper and a pen. Right now, today, before you do anything else. Write down 3 commitments in your own handwriting. 1 commitment that widens your spread. 1 commitment that protects your time and your circle. 1 commitment that you will check on yourself in exactly 30 days. Sign your name at the bottom. Put a date next to it. Then put that paper somewhere you will see it every single morning, like taped to your bathroom mirror, so you cannot avoid looking yourself in the eye while you decide whether you kept your word. This is your 30-day contract, and it only works if it is physical, not a note on your phone that you will swipe past tomorrow. Paper, pen, your own handwriting. There is something about writing a commitment by hand and signing it with your own name that a typed note on a screen simply cannot copy. People keep promises to paper that they quietly break to themselves in their heads all the time. 30 days is not long enough to make you rich. 30 days is long enough to prove to yourself whether you are someone who follows through or someone who only agrees. That proof is worth more right now than any amount of money, because it decides everything that happens after this video ends. Out of everyone watching this right now, 98 of you will agree with every word I just said. You will nod, you will maybe even feel something. 2 of you will actually go get the paper and the pen and sign your name. I do not know yet which group you are in. Neither do you until you do it. There is no shame in being one of the 98 today. There is only a cost, paid quietly, year after year, if you stay there forever. The room you are sitting in right now already contains a piece of paper and something to write with. Everything you need to begin tonight is already within reach of your hand. The only missing ingredient was ever the decision. None of these 6 pillars require you to be smarter than the people around you, or luckier, or better connected from the start. They require you to be willing to do something small and boring, on a day when nobody would notice if you skipped that is the whole game. It always has been. The people who lived the second set of rules were never hiding a secret formula from you. They were simply willing to keep their word to themselves on the days it cost them something. In the next video, we go further into the one pillar most people quietly sabotage without realizing it, the one hiding inside the quiet network, and why the 5 people closest to you may already be the biggest reason you have not moved yet. Until then, widen the gap, protect the decade, and choose the room you stand in carefully. That choice has always mattered more than people want to admit.